What if the greatest threat to truth is charm? Look around. The most applauded voices today are not the wisest, they're the most confident. The influencers who fabricate their lives. The politicians who change values like they change suits. The CEOs who promise salvation, then pivot to chaos. We don't reward honesty, we reward performance. And somewhere along the way, we stopped asking, is it true? And started asking, does it work? This isn't just a moral decay. It's a design. Machiavelli saw it coming centuries ago. In The Prince, he wrote, "It is not necessary for a prince to have all the good qualities, but it is necessary to appear to have them. Appearances are the new substance. Optics are the new ethics." And now, with AI crafting voices, faces, entire personalities, we've entered what Canadian philosopher George Grant would call a technological order of moral exile. In this world, even sincerity is coded. Even grief becomes content. What Grant feared technology stripping meaning from the soul is now our everyday reality. We post, we edit, we filter not just our photos, but our identities. Because in today's world, to be real is to be weak. To be raw is to risk cancellation. To confess confusion is to forfeit status. So instead, we curate. We adopt the language of outrage. We wear the mask of certainty. And behind every viral tweet, behind every perfectly lit TikTok, hides the same truth. We're terrified that if people saw who we really were, they'd look away. But here's the twist. They're all pretending to. The fake have become fluent, and the fluent have become powerful. In this empire of performance, deception is not the side effect, it's the currency. Truth doesn't collapse under violence anymore. It fades under applause. So we must ask, have we created a world where pretending isn't just allowed, but required, where survival demands acting? If that's true, then the question is no longer who is lying, but can anyone afford to be honest anymore? In 1513, imprisoned, tortured, and betrayed by those he served, Niccolo Machiavelli wrote The Prince, not as a handbook for corruption, but as a brutal mirror of political reality. His aim wasn't immorality, it was clarity. Machiavelli dared to describe the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. And what he saw was this. People prefer the appearance of virtue over virtue itself. The ruler who seeks stability must master symbols, simulate morality, conceal intentions. Say one thing, do another. Smile while advancing. Centuries later, that duplicity hasn't vanished, it's evolved. It used to lurk in royal corridors. Now it beams from the screens in our hands. Politics became spectacle. Leadership turned into marketing. And a public, increasingly cynical about truth, began rewarding those who lie best as long as the lie is seductive, well-packaged, and algorithm-friendly. Enter George Grant, the Canadian philosopher who, in the 20th century, warned of a soulless technocracy. For Grant, the crisis wasn't just political, it was spiritual. He cautioned, when technology replaces moral judgment, truth becomes a product, and the common good is reduced to a management strategy. Leaders no longer need to be just efficient. Justice becomes performance. Ethics, a banner. Modern psychology helps explain why this works. Leon Festinger's theory of cognitive dissonance shows that when we're confronted with uncomfortable truths, we reject them and cling to emotionally safer narratives. This is why charismatic liars hold so much power. They offer comfort, identity, direction, even if it's all a facade. Today, duplicity has gone viral. Influencers promote products they never use. CEOs speak of purpose while exploiting. Politicians preach unity while sowing division behind closed doors. The most disturbing part, it's not that people don't know, it's that they do and prefer it that way. The illusion is less painful than the truth. Truth has become negotiable. Pretending is praised, and lying when done elegantly is seen as strategic genius. Machiavelli knew it. Those who talk most about ethics are often hiding something. And, Grant would add, in a technocratic world, truth is not what is, it's what works. So the question isn't just who's lying, but why are we so willing to be deceived? Falseness is no longer a character flaw. Today, it's a social skill. In business, in love, on social media, knowing how to pretend has become a competitive advantage. But what does this say about us? What kind of society rewards the mask and punishes authenticity? What Machiavelli once saw in the corridors of power now echoes in corporate meetings, Zoom calls, and Instagram stories. The principle remains: control perception, display virtue even when absent, show emotion even if fabricated, because in the image game, truth is irrelevant. The winning story is the one that sticks. And in this theater, we all become actors of ourselves. George Grant would see this as the symptom of a world where values have been replaced by metrics. Likes, engagement, reach. Ethics became aesthetics. Sincerity became a reputational risk. And authenticity, a luxury reserved for those who've already won. But there's a cost. Psychology tells us that living disconnected from your truth leads to existential fatigue. Carl Jung called it the false self, a mask we wear to fit in, to please, to survive. At first, it protects, then it suffocates. And the tragedy, the more we wear it, the more we forget who we were without it. This everyday pretending isn't just personal, it's structural. Corporations say inclusion while excluding. Governments preach peace while arming. People post gratitude while resenting their lives. The result is a society where everything sounds sincere, but nothing holds when the sound stops. Still, we keep pretending, because faking is easier than confronting, safer than being vulnerable, more profitable than being honest. And perhaps because deep down we fear our raw, fragile, contradictory truth won't be accepted. So we edit, filter, perform. But what happens when everyone's pretending and no one believes anymore? What remains when trust is eroded, not by grand lies, but by small daily fictions? Machiavelli warned, the wise prince fakes virtue to keep power. Grant would reply, in a technocratic civilization, that's not a tactic, it's the norm. Pretending is no longer the exception. It is the rule, and truth, if it wants to survive, must retreat into silence. And maybe the most haunting question isn't who's faking, it's how much of you has already become performance. What happens when the truth no longer fits the format? In a world where virality is currency and perception is power, authenticity becomes a risk. To be real is to be vulnerable, and vulnerability doesn't trend. Machiavelli never imagined a world where princes would be brands, but he would understand it. His core insight remains timeless. Survival demands adaptability. The problem today is that the game has changed. No longer about swords or alliances, but about optics. In the empire of images, substance has become a liability. The more sincere you are, the more exposed. And the more exposed, the more disposable. George Grant foresaw this collapse of ethics beneath the weight of technology. He warned that the new elites would not be tyrants, but engineers of perception. What mattered was not what something was, but how it could be used. Truth became a function, morality became marketing, and justice a performance in this world. The ethical person becomes a paradox. Too honest to manipulate, too aware to play along. Their silence is misunderstood, their nuance mistrusted, because the algorithm doesn't reward doubt. It rewards conviction, no matter how shallow. So what happens? Many fall silent. Others become actors in their own lives, curating every opinion, every reaction, every belief. We've built a society where it's safer to fake confidence than to admit confusion, safer to echo a popular opinion than to explore a true thought. And here's the tragedy. When the liars rise, the honest grow ashamed, not of their values, but of their ineffectiveness. Integrity begins to feel like weakness, and truth like an old language no one speaks anymore. Even those who resist feel it. That gnawing fear, will anyone listen if I don't perform? Because the modern marketplace doesn't reward honesty, it rewards spectacle. And those who refuse to become spectacles vanish. This is not just a cultural shift, it's a moral crisis. When courage becomes cringe, when empathy becomes naivete, when doubt becomes treason, we are no longer debating facts. We are debating whether reality itself still matters. But here is the quiet hope. What is fake can only survive if we keep watching, if we keep clapping, if we keep pretending not to notice. Maybe the first rebellion isn't loud. Maybe it's not a speech or a movement. Maybe it's just this: to pause, to not share, to not scroll, to not laugh at the mask, because every empire of illusion eventually falls, not when it is attacked, but when it is ignored. Power used to be earned, now it is performed. In an age where appearances dominate substance, the world has become a stage one where influence is not measured by truth, but by reach. The actor with the clearest script, the boldest pose, the most captivating costume wins. And the audience, we applaud, we share, we follow. This isn't new. Niccolo Machiavelli, centuries ago, warned that it is not necessary for a prince to have all the virtuous qualities, but it is necessary to appear to have them. But what was once a strategy for kings has become a lifestyle for all. On Instagram, in campaign ads, in tech boardrooms, truth is not only optional, it is inconvenient. Because truth complicates, image clarifies. Today's politicians are influencers. CEOs are storytellers. Activists are brands. In this new empire of pretenders, sincerity is a liability, and doubt is weakness. The performance must go on at any cost. George Grant would see this as the logical result of a technocratic age, when values are replaced by algorithms and ethics are subordinated to efficiency. The authentic soul is lost. What matters is the simulation of virtue, not its presence. What matters is how quickly you can signal goodness, not how deeply you practice it. A tweet, a slogan, a photo in a refugee camp, these become the rituals of modern moral theater. And this theater isn't empty. It shapes policy. It guides revolutions. It decides who gets heard and who gets erased. A scandal can end a life. A viral video can build an empire. In this terrain, outrage is currency, and narrative is ammunition. You don't need to be honest, you just need to be convincing. But here lies the danger. When performance replaces principle, when optics overtake reality, governance becomes a game of impressions. Who suffers when decisions are made to please, not to protect? Who pays the price when perception becomes policy? We do, because the longer the mask is worn, the more it fuses with the face. The more we perform, the less we remember who we truly are. It so ask yourself, in your own life, where have you started to perform instead of be? When did your truth become a costume? What do we lose when we keep lying to survive? In today's world, pretending isn't just a tactic, it's a lifestyle. But no performance is free. Beneath the polished smiles and curated personas, something vital erodes, our inner coherence. We begin to fraction it visibly, but spiritually, Carl Jung called it the psychic split, when who we are and who we perform begin to diverge. At first, the split is manageable. A job interview smile, a first date mask. But over time, the act metastasizes. It invades our friendships, our careers, even our self-talk. Until one day, we can no longer distinguish between the mask and the man. And this fracture isn't harmless. Psychologists now recognize identity fatigue, the emotional burnout of living disingenuously. Every time we edit ourselves to please the algorithm, to dodge rejection, or to chase validation, we chip away at our authenticity. The performance steals energy, intimacy withers, and a subtle despair sets in the pain of being admired for someone we're not. George Grant foresaw this as the ethical collapse within technological societies. In a world obsessed with function over essence, people become brands, souls become data points, and truth, once sacred, becomes negotiable. Grant warned, when moral clarity is replaced by strategic ambiguity, we don't just lose honesty, we lose ourselves. And Machiavelli, he might argue it's all necessary, that power demands theater, but even the prince acknowledged the toll. A ruler may feign virtue, but must still confront the void it leaves behind. So what is the real cost of pretending? Not just societal cynicism, not just political decay, but the quiet, tragic death of the self. We no longer know how to be without being seen. We fear silence because it has no audience. And in that fear, we trade depth for decoration, essence for image. Ask yourself, when did you last feel fully real? And if you never stopped performing, would you even notice? Maybe the rebellion we need is inner. In a world of curated truths and weaponized charm, integrity is not just rare, it's radical. It doesn't trend, it doesn't sell, but it saves. Because in the empire of pretenders, being honest is not naive, it's revolutionary. Machiavelli understood power. He exposed its mechanics without apology. But what if the ultimate power is the refusal to fake? What if authenticity were uncertain, vulnerabilities, the last form of courage? George Grant believed that redemption lay not in progress, but in remembering, in returning to deeper moral roots, to stillness, to truth that isn't marketable, but meaningful. He warned, a society can advance technologically while regressing spiritually. The antidote, integrity, not as performance, but as presence, too. Live with integrity is to resist the performance instinct. It means speaking even when unsure, feeling without editing, choosing silence over spectacle. Not because it's easy, but because it's real. And here's the paradox. What we fear will make us weak, often makes us unbreakable. In psychology, true resilience isn't the ability to mask pain, the capacity to face it without flinching. Integrity strengthens not because it avoids conflict, but because it aligns action with belief. And that alignment, the inner harmony of saying what you mean and meaning what you say, is the beginning of peace. So the question is no longer, can we lie well enough to succeed? It's, can we live true enough to endure? The age of performance is cracking. Audiences are growing tired. We crave realness not just in others, but in ourselves. The applause will fade. The algorithm will change. But your truth, that's eternal. So start small. Say the uncomfortable thing. Resist the urge to filter your grief. Let someone see your real face. That's where the revolution begins, not in noise, but in nakedness. Because the future won't be decided by who pretends best, but by who dares to stop. What would your life look like if you stopped performing? If this whispered something to your soul, pause. Don't scroll, don't share, just breathe. And if you're ready, walk with us, subscribe, and start living without the mask.